Hello and welcome back to the On The Ball podcast. This is episode 118 of the show, and we are joined by a guest this week. I promised one for a few weeks, couldn't deliver, but I've got Fraser on, the Oracle of Rugby League. Are you happy to be here, mate?
Always happy to be with you, Hamish.
Thanks, mate. Thanks.
Any
Appreciate
sport,
it.
anytime.
Appreciate it. Appreciate your presence, really. Locke let us down once again, but
Yeah,
no, that's all right.
dog.
We love Locke. We've had a nice Easter weekend. It is now Easter Monday, so unfortunately that means the mighty West Tigers will be playing tonight or this afternoon. How are you feeling for it?
I think they'll lose, but I think it'll be a close fight.
Yeah, as long as they're competitive, unlike some of the games this weekend, but we'll get to that in a second. So, although there is still one game left of the round, I want to get this up early. Can't be doing it Wednesday because then the next round starts Thursday. So we will just have to forget about the Parramatta Eels and the Tigers for this week. But we will be reviewing round 4 of the NRL. There's obviously a lot of talking points coming out of this week. Sadly, a lot of them negative, as it does seem to be the case for NRL. So we'll probably have to address those first. And I actually want to get something off my chest. This inequality talk about the NRL is... it's been triggering me all week. Usually I get triggered by a referee's call or a coach's decision or something like that, but stuff like this, broader picture off the field stuff, usually doesn't rile me up too much. I'm just they're just doing it for some clickbait, they're just ill-informed, but this one's actually annoying me because to me it's just completely inaccurate. The chats of whether we should have a draft, whether there's just this big six like a Premier League or something like that. It's just wrong. It doesn't take much effort to realise it's wrong. What do you think about all this chat that's been going on this weekend?
Look, I think what you're saying is there is an inequality. There's a huge gap between the top teams and the bottom teams, but it's no different to any other year, really.
Exactly.
It's just with the game as fast as it is, the gap's bigger, that's all, because the other teams can't slow the game down, but they're still, even if you went back to the old rules, the top 6 will still be winning. That's what people forget. If you go back 2 or 3 years ago, under the old rules, it was still the same teams, so the rules are not making the change. It's just, in all professional sports, teams go through cycles, and unfortunately, these teams are at the bottom of their cycles. And then the other thing they've been caught out with is the change of the rules has changed the way you play the game, and they haven't been able to adapt. So then they've got to make those changes through their roster, which will take 3 years. So, but it is what it is. Yeah,
and I've just whipped up some research here just quickly. We basically have been talking about this all week, but I've just got some definitive data on it. So the Rabbitohs, so we'll address some of the teams who are in this supposed top 5, top 6 that are permanently better than everyone else. The Rabbitohs didn't make finals in 2016 or 17. The Roosters didn't make finals in 2016. The Raiders didn't make finals in 2018. Panthers didn't make finals in 2019. So that's 4 of the supposed big 5. Melbourne's the outlier, but that's because they have the best coach of all time and they've basically had 3 of the best 10 players of all time in their team for a decade. So that's pretty handy, and they've got some pretty good off-field administration, one of the best executives in the competition. So I think that speaks for itself. And then if we look at the teams down the bottom, so the main 3 culprits at the moment and the main 3 who have been on the ends of some big losses, the Broncos I don't think are an issue. I think they'll be good in a couple of years. They've got some good young players, so I don't think you can harp on them too much. But looking at the Cowboys, Manly and the Bulldogs, the Cowboys currently have Val Holmes on $1 million till 2025, which I think is probably one of the worst contracts in NRL history. Michael Morgan on $1 million till 2023, and Jason Taumalolo on $1 million till 2025. So to think those 3 players are getting paid $3 million and what they're putting out on the field, I think that just explains why the Cowboys are losing by 40 points every week. So I don't think we can say it's unequal or there needs to be a draft to help them out. They just need to stop making stupid signings, really. And there's talks of them signing Reynolds for 800, 900k, which, look, I don't know about that because he is approaching the end of his career as well. They've made stupid signings like Masters and stuff. So I think they've just got to sort their signings out because they've dug themselves into a hole. And I think we were talking about this at breakfast this morning, but I think JT and Matty Bowen were hiding some of those mistakes over the last decade or so just through the talent they had. But yeah, it's shown that their list management is actually quite poor ever since JT retired. But yeah, and also looking at the Cowboys, they were in finals like 2 or 3 seasons ago, so they're not been perennial losers. Manly have arguably been one of the best teams since 2000, so you can't argue they've been down the bottom. Looking at some of their cap management, DC's on 1.3 million. Right now he's probably playing at a level of a 600k player, I would say. Moses Sully's on 550k. That's awful. Alawai's on 600k, who at the time that's probably what he was worth, but he's not played well so far. And the Turbos are on just over 2 million combined, and I don't think you could justify that they should be worth 1.2 million combined at the moment, because Tom can't get on the field and Jake's just not delivering what we need from him. And then the Dogs, Des Hasler basically just destroyed their salary cap, and they're only starting to get over that. But however, in the early 2010s, they were one of the best teams. But they've also made some pretty bad signings. I think Kotrick was overpaid, Dylan Napa was overpaid. However, they do have Matt Burton coming to the club next year, and Addo Carr. So I think the Bulldogs will only get better as the season goes on, as some of those combinations grow. So I think I've dispelled some of the chat there that there's this perennial top 6, these permanent teams down the bottom, to be quite false, because it's been frustrating me all weekend, really, because it doesn't take much thinking to realise that it isn't true. The one outlier is Melbourne, but as I explained before, that's just a rare case. So do you think a draft, despite me thinking it's rubbish that there's a permanent top 6 or something, do you think a draft could help, or do you think that just wouldn't work in NRL and it's really only for AFL?
Well, I think the problem is with the draft, you still wouldn't see it for 5 years.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you say you did it, well, you wouldn't do it next year, but it would be 2 to 3 years before it comes in, and then you've got to let these young kids go through, and 18-year-olds take a long time in the league to get... I mean, I think you couldn't do 18. I think they have to do 21 in the league. I think 18, they're too small. And then I just can't see the clubs agreeing. Big clubs like Penrith, they've got huge juniors, Parramatta... why are they going to sit back and let the Roosters and that get their best players? So, my feeling is what you need to do is you don't need a draft, but you should be rewarded for building your own players. If you look at our club, West Tigers, they've had a really good pipeline of young players. So when if another club buys your players within 5 years of them making grade, you should get $200,000 or $300,000 back in cash from the other club. So say Tedesco gets 800,000, the Tigers get 300,000 of that. And then the other thing you'd do is push their salary cap out. So not only would they get cash, but you'd say, well, okay, we'll give you more for benefits, because then that way the clubs are forced to develop their own players without a draft, and you get benefits. So it becomes a bit like English soccer, that your juniors actually are worth money to you. Yeah. So if they're not making it for you, you can make money. Whereas right now, I mean, you look what's happening with Penrith. Penrith have just got this huge crop of players, and other clubs now, including ours, are just sitting there taking off their best, the next level down. And Penrith go, well, what's the rewards into that? So, I mean, to your answer, I don't think we need a draft, but I think the clubs need to get their pathways done. I mean, if you look at what Phil Gould with Penrith, he went in there, 8 years ago, hosed the joint out, so they went through a lot of pain, and finally it's starting to pay dividends. He'll hopefully do the same with the Warriors. And you've just got to do it. Tim Sheens did it with the Tigers back in the thousands. So I think that's more it. I don't think you need a draft. But I think every club should have pathways for juniors, and you should get benefits for developing your own juniors, which right now in the salary cap there isn't.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Obviously, you can't have a transfer fee, because that doesn't work with salary caps and stuff, but there does need to be compensation. I know the AFL do it, but they do it through draft picks, so that won't work unless the draft comes in. But yeah, 100% agree. I always felt that it was pretty unjust, like when we went through that stage in the early 2010s of producing players and people would pick them off and you'd get nothing for it. And I think, sadly, Penrith will eventually lose quite a few of these youngsters and not get anything from it either. So I do think something needs to change there, especially, I know they're the target of a lot of abuse, but it's true. That's really what the Roosters do.
But what you got to do is, there's two ways to rebuild, isn't there? There's one where you go out and buy, say the Tigers and the Cowboys, they've got to pay, if a player's worth 600,000, a good player, those clubs have got to pay 800,000 to get them, so their salary caps get stuffed up by that. Whereas the Roosters would probably get the same player for 450,000. So you got equalities under the salary cap. So my belief is you don't play that game. You pay what they're worth. If they want to come, they come. If they don't, but you build your juniors and your clubs. But you need a good board, that says, yeah, we get it. For the next 5 years, we're going to be rubbish. But at the end of that 4 to 5 years, the juniors start coming through and you see a change.
Yeah, well, I think the Titans are the perfect case study for that. They thought about going that route that you mentioned before with the Cherry Evans. Thankfully for them, he backflipped, because I think they would be nowhere near where they are now if he did decide to go to the Gold Coast, as he agreed upon earlier with his contract. But now they've had time. They didn't get that marquee player they wanted, so they've just been able to build. They've stolen a few players out of the Broncos junior ranks, but for cheap at the time. Obviously for Feed it wasn't cheap, but that's a bit different. That was like icing on the top of the cake. But yeah, now they've all of a sudden got a lot of exciting young Queensland talent or Northern New South Wales talent, and they're on the verge of making a debut finals appearance for a long time, and they look like they're going to be a team in the top 8 for a fair few years to come with an exciting young coach. That's another thing teams can look at. I think sometimes they just go, oh, well, who's the assistant coach at the best team right now? We'll go him. But I think you've got to be smart with your coaching decision. Go to the Super League if there's a good coach out there like the Gold Coast did. So, yeah, I think that's a perfect case study for it. And yeah, 100% agree. I think teams, well, the Cowboys right now, they're trying to buy their way out of this hole they're in with this Adam Reynolds contract thing. I think there was rumours they were going to get Benji Marshall earlier in the year, and I tell you what, none of those moves are going to fix what they're stuck with at the moment. So I just wanted to address that to open out the podcast. A little bit of a negative chat, but it has been frustrating me all week. Another thing I want to address, as I've got you here, I touched on it a little bit last week, but we saw it come to fruition once again yesterday with the Knights having 4 injuries in the game. Do you think we need an 18th man? And if so, how can we stop teams from exploiting it?
Yeah, I think you need an 18th man if it's head injuries, but like that game yesterday, they weren't head injuries, they were just injuries. So you're always going to have that. But I think you've got to do what the league's looking at. The 18th player can only actually be used if you get 3 head injuries, and those head injuries should be classified by the NRL and not the club. So there should be an NRL doctor at every game that he decides whether that's HIA, because I was reading yesterday, they reckon Parramatta actually there is a head bin that you can use for foul play, but they're saying that Parramatta is abusing it with injuries, or like their leg injuries and things like that. So coaches will always try and abuse it, so you've got to put really strict rules around it. I don't agree with the merging players because it doesn't make any sense. So you have an 18th player, but you only can use it, and if it's really strictly policed, then they can't abuse it, but they'll find a way.
Yeah, they always will find a way, but that's just sport and the competitive nature of it. I think it should just be for any head knock. I think the rule they're bringing in this week's just never going to happen. 3 head knocks, like that happens once a year probably. I think it should just be if, as you said, if an NRL doctor, independent doctor, confirms that this guy's out for the game with a head injury, I think the sub can come on then. Because we saw, even on Good Friday, yes, they were probably going to lose anyway, but when Lachlan Lewis went down for the Dogs, all of a sudden they had a hooker go into 5'8", who've never played in the halves before. They had a debutant go into hooker, having to play 80 minutes that he was probably going to only play 20 minutes. And that was basically game over from the outset. So, yes, I understand that they're doing something in the NRL, which is a good thing, bringing that in this week. But, yeah, I just think it's got to be brought down, the restrictions a little bit, because I think 3 head knocks is just never going to happen, really. But yeah, I think with the non-head injuries, I think sadly you've just got to cop that. Every team gets it. So
well, it's meant to be. You want a game where fatigue is an issue, because otherwise big players just dominate it, and you don't want to go back to that. You want to give the smaller players a chance to play. Whereas if you just, as you said before, when you had 4 forwards on the bench, that the reason they did that because they could do it. Whereas if you've got fatigue, you don't want 4 forwards.
Yeah. Exactly.
You always want a young, back in, the 90s and that, clubs always had 2 or 3 fast players on their bench that they'd bring in the second half when the forwards were tired, and they'd just run amok.
Yeah, it's a bit like soccer, how they use that substitution. Right, so that's kind of the negative things that's kind of out of the week, and the last negative thing is probably the Knights. Before we touch on the positive things, they had an absolute shocker over Sunday, didn't they? It reminded me exactly the same last year. I think it was 3 or 4 rounds after the resumption post-lockdown. They played the Panthers on the exact same time slot, a Sunday afternoon. Mitchell Pearce went down, Connor Watson went down, someone else went down, can't remember who, against the Panthers, and they ended up losing in Golden Point, I think. Or they might have won in Golden Point, actually, but it kind of derailed their season there. They went from being a good team to a team that kind of just made up the numbers in the 8. But they lost Mitchell Pearce, Tex Hoy, David Clemmer, and Kurt Mann yesterday, all to injuries. Kurt Mann looks like it's just concussion, so he should be fine for next week. Clemmer, they're unsure. He had a weird knee twist, but he's getting scans today. But Hoy and Pearce look long-term. Hoy did a hammy, and Pearce ruptured his pec. So they think Pearce could be up to 10 weeks. Hoy could be a month to 6 weeks. But with Kalen Ponga coming back, that's not too relevant. But it's pretty damning for a team that's had a pretty awful start to the season. Lost to the Tigers last week. Now lost to the Dragons yesterday. And it looks like out of the teams that made the 8 last year, they're looking like the favourites to drop out this year with the Sharks' good recent form. So, it's going to really test out Adam O'Brien. I think we're going to see what he's made of pretty early in his coaching career, and also KP as well. There's a lot of raps about Ponga. A lot of the fullbacks this year look like they've gone to a new level. And so when he comes back from his injury, whether it be this week or next week, he's really got to put the boys on his back and really carry that team. They've got a good forward pack. On paper, they should be making the top 8. And yes, without Mitchell Pearce, it's tough. But they should be there, and it's all down to O'Brien and Ponga, really, and what they do over the next 20 weeks. Because, look, it's unlucky that they've got those injuries, but I'm sure we saw the Roosters cop that last week. But I just thought that was one of the biggest losers coming out of the week. Their season kind of got tipped on its head just in the space of 80 minutes. All right, winners of the week, a bit more positive. The Roosters, I think, are a big winner. I was, similar to the Knights this week, I was pretty low on them last week because obviously they suffered a fair few injuries in that game against the Rabbitohs, but Walker looked good on debut, steered the team around to a win. They proved that they can still win without established halves, which I was doubting. You and Locke were pretty confident they still could. But they comfortably beat the Warriors 32-12. Do you think they can still win the premiership with Walker and Hutchison in the halves, or just be a good top 8 team?
Yeah, they're good. No, they'll be a top 5 team, but you compare them to Melbourne and South. South killed them the week before. So I watched them last night. Look, they're good, but I think against the really good teams, they're not as good. So I think Melbourne and Penrith and Rabbits will kill them when the finals come around. I think even Canberra will do it. So I still think they're where they were last year. They'll finish 5th or 6th.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I think it will bite them in. Well, it's not like they made a decision, but it will come around to hurt them in finals, I think, having the inexperienced halves. But yeah, I think we saw last week every team that's basically below them in the rankings right now that they'll pretty easily knock off. They've just got that much talent. The Dragons, what do you make of the Dragons? They've got off to a 3-1 start. They won last night without Ben Hunt, which no one was really expecting, but the Knights did have those injuries. Do you think Dragons are a top 8 smoky, or they've just had a soft draw early?
I think they've had a soft draw, but they're playing better. I mean, I think the problem with the Dragons, I actually don't think their roster was bad. I think they just lost the plot. So I think they're just getting more out of the players they're getting.
Yeah.
So, I think they'll challenge for the top 8, the Dragons. Which surprised me, because at the beginning of the year we all thought after their trial games they were rubbish. But they've come out But then, like we said, they've beaten the Cowboys. Who'd they beat last week?
Oh, I can't remember.
Newcastle. Manly. So you got to be careful. I mean, they've got a soft draw, but they're winning, and that's what they've got to do. And, they look competitive. They've got a big pack of forwards.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what lets them down, though, is their back line I don't think is as good. Lomax is a really good player, but I think Dufty's too hit and miss, and Norman goes missing in big games.
Yeah, completely agree. Ben Hunt was in the form of his life, so it's a shame that he's been injured. Jack Bird to come back into the side this week after missing through suspension. So yeah, they're looking like a team that could cause a few upsets this year. But yeah, 100% agree. I think the soft draw might be making them look a little bit better than they are at the moment. And I know I looked at their draw a little bit earlier, and it does get a little bit tougher from here. But their defence looks like it's a bit more solid this year, and they do have enough talent to shock a few teams, so definitely watch out for the Dragons. And finally, the biggest winner of this week is probably Ryan Pappenhausen. Incredible. We were at the game. It was pretty awesome what happened. How 4 tries in, was it 15 minutes? 11 minutes. Jesus. And I think coming out of this weekend, if you did a poll around the NRL, I reckon most would rate him above Tedesco. We'll talk about that in a little bit, though. And the Storm lost both games without him. He comes back, they win by 40 points. So I think he's coming out... Well, he already was a superstar, but I think coming out of this weekend, he's looking like one of the best, if not the best player in the competition. What do you think of little Pappy? I know you're a big fan.
I think it's just brilliant. I think he suits the new rules. All he does is loiter around the ball, and that's what you want with your halves and fullbacks. You just want them around the ball all the time, so when the ball comes free, they're there, and that's what he did the other night. Like, he didn't really set up the tries. The breaks were made, but he's right next to him once the breaks are made. And that's what you want, your fast guy right there. But, he also, though, whenever he gets the ball, he caused Brisbane all sorts of trouble. Like, he'll get 10, 15 metres, and then he's really fast play the ball, and then you're stuffed. Once they get that roll on, then you're not coming back.
Yeah. Do you think he was the best player on the ground on Friday night?
Yeah, no, I think the forwards were better. I think Nelson was better. I think Christian Welch was better. I mean, the forwards win the games, really.
Yeah. I actually do think that was probably Nelson's best game I've ever seen him play. Before he came on, it was actually kind of close in the middle, apart from the breakaway tries they were scoring. The fight in the middle was actually alright, because Payne Haas was playing well. But then when Nelson came on, the Broncos looked a bit intimidated.
Well, he gets a pass away.
Yeah.
And so then Pappenhausen comes into the game, because all he does, as I said before, is run around that guy with the ball. So if he gets his hands free, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And he's hard to stop. So, you've really got to... But then again, it's weird, because Brisbane's had the size to take him out, but they just didn't.
Yeah, so they're probably some of the players of the week right there. Welch, Nelson, Pappenhausen. Just another guy I wanted to talk about for player of the week, Damien Cook. I thought he was back to his best on Good Friday footy. He had a pretty off-season to everyone's admission last year, but he had 2 line breaks, but they were more than just line breaks. They were try assists straight through the middle of the ruck. He just drew them past. I think one was to Cody Walker, can't remember who the other one was to, and he also completed 47 tackles at 98%. So he looks like he's back to his best, which is pretty scary for opposition to the Rabbitohs, because he was probably performing at 80% of his best level last year. So to think that they could have another gear and Damien Cook getting back to his 2018, 2019 best is frightening for everyone in the competition. I do fear for the Rabbitohs that they're peaking a little bit early, but they might be just that good they could sustain this for the whole season. Also, shout out to Chad Townsend, who had 3 try assists and sunk 8 from 8 goals. That was pretty impressive. And I thought Matt Burton was good in his debut performance at centre. Right, we touched on it before, Pappenhausen. So I thought we brought it in last week, the list segment where I talked about my most hated and loved, well, not loved, but teams I like the most in the competition. This week we're going to be doing our top 10 fullbacks. Obviously, Pappenhausen's breakout start to this year, well, and the back end of last year is... It's raised a lot of conversation about who's the best fullback in the game, and right now we're pretty lucky to have so many good ones. I was just looking at the 16 teams before. It's probably 12 gun fullbacks right now, which is pretty crazy. So we're just going to run through our individual top 10 fullback rankings. So if you want to go from yours, starting from 10, mate.
Starting with 10?
Yep, go from 10 to 1. We'll leave the best till last.
Well, top 10, I got Tommy T from Manly, and that's just because he hasn't played.
Yeah, you can't get on the
He'd probably be up higher, but he's not playing.
Yeah.
Then I've got Ponga, because the same reason. Like, you just don't know. I'm not sure about Ponga still. I don't know if he's a lot of hype, or he is that good, but so he's down the bottom. Then I've got the Canberra fullback Shans.
Yeah.
Then I've got a Smoky, and it's probably biased because the Tigers, but Dane Laurie, I think he looks good. He's young. He's only played 4 games, but he looks dangerous. Every time he gets the ball, he looks dangerous. I mean, probably the only thing wrong with him is small.
Yeah.
6, I got Dylan Edwards, who's just safe. I mean, he's nothing special, but he's safe.
Yeah.
Then you got Gutherson, and Gutherson really is just all sheer energy. I mean, he's not...
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot of skill there. I think he just gives 120% every week, and he's everywhere. Then I've got RTS from
The Warriors.
Because he's...
Big Rog.
He's probably... I think you could... If he was behind the same pack of forwards as Pappenhausen and Tedesco, he'd probably be the best in the game, because he's dynamite. Then you got Latrell Mitchell, Tedesco, and I've got Pappenhausen ahead of Tedesco, because I think it's a toss of the coin between both of them. But I think I just like Pappenhausen better because I think he's more dangerous. Teddy plays a very strong game, very brute strength. Like he's fast and brute strength. He's something like 100 kilos or something.
Yeah.
So he's a big forward that can run fast. Whereas Pappenhausen is small, but he just pops up everywhere. And the key to that, really, when you look at those Pappenhausen, Tedesco, RTS, and Gutherson, they're always around the ball. Latrell Mitchell's a bit different. He drifts in and out of the game, but he plays a different style. He's more of a big 5'8".
Yeah.
But those other guys, they're very all similar. But as you said, we're pretty lucky. I mean, that's a pretty good list. And they're all playing similar, and the new rules all suit them.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, just quickly before we move on to my top 10, I wanted to ask you, you've got Pappenhausen 1. Does that mean he is your New South Wales fullback, or do you think the Origin game is a bit different and suits Tedesco?
I think Tedesco will play because Origin's a bit of a brutal game the first 40 minutes, his size. So you'd put Tedesco in and then you'd have Pappenhausen off the bench. I mean, he could play anywhere. 5'8", he could play wing and he could play fullback, but I think you bring him on once the forwards have done a bit of damage. And that's what New South Wales lacked last year was they really lacked that spark, whereas that last game with Harry Grant with Queensland, they had the spark. Whereas our guys just, but then, I mean, the only thing I'd stand back is the problem in New South Wales last year, we picked far too many people out of position. And so they don't gel. But, I'd still have Tedesco above Pappenhausen.
Yeah, shout out to Harry Grant and Cooper Johns, who were just in the Melbourne Players Box just chatting to girls on Friday night. Good on him. Harry Grant was actually giving the lads nothing. He was too busy with his girl, but fair enough. Alright, my top 10 list. It's a little bit different, fairly similar though. Number 10, I'm going Brimson. I think he's a little bit more inconsistent than some of the guys up the top here, but on his day, he can be a top 5 fullback in the comp. 9, I've got Dylan Edwards, pretty similar to you. I think he's just a fairly stock standard. Most weeks he'll give you a 7, 8 out of 10 performance. Rarely see a 9 or 10 out of him though, but he's a very good player. 8, I've gone with Shans. I think he is one of the best defensive fullbacks in the competition. However, I do think that's a little bit less important in the last couple of years. I think that was really important in 2016, 17, 18, but you seem to see less fullback stops at the moment, but I think he's really good at that. Similar to Gutherson, I think he's a bit less skillful, but just gives everything he's got for the Green Machine. 7, I'm going Ponga. Yeah, we haven't seen him in 2021 yet, but I think on his day he's still very good. I think he's similar to Roger, a little bit less, not as strong as Roger, doesn't break as many tackles, but he's got a bit more of a passing game, so yeah, I've got him down at 7, but he's a similar sort of player to Roger, I think. 6, I've gone Latrell, which is debatably too low, but I just think the top 5's too good personally. But yeah, he's a very good ball player. I would be interested to see how he went in a team that wasn't so dominant in attack, because usually he's only required on the last play and he just does the block play pass, but he's very good at that, so you can't argue. 5, I've gone with Tommy T. I've probably got him lower than he could be just because he never bloody plays, but I think when he's there, we saw it at the start of last year, he's right up there with the very best. 4, I've gone with the Gutherson. I think at the start of this year, if I did this list, he would be down at 8 or 9, but he's had a sensational start to the year. Completely love how much effort and energy he brings. He reminds me of, this sounds outrageous, but he reminds me of Thurston, how, obviously Thurston's a lot better player than Gutherson, but he just brings everything to the game. He's always somehow there. They make a line break. Who's chasing him down? It's Gutho. He's just incredible at that kind of stuff. 3rd, I've got Roger, and 100% agree with what you said about Roger. I think if he was playing in a better team with more strike power around him, he would be the best fullback in the competition, but he's still pretty bloody good at number 3. Number 2, I've gone Pappy. I put Teddy first. I just had to do it. Like you said, it's a flip of a coin, really. Both sensational players, both probably in the top 5 in our game currently. But for me, the way I think about it is, I think if they played for a mid-table side, I think Teddy would be the better player. I think Pappenhausen thrives on playing for the best team in the competition. So does Teddy, so it's hard to... We haven't seen Teddy play for an average team for 3 or 4 years, so it is hard to make that argument. But I just think, like we saw on Friday night, realistically, Pappenhausen's impact was finishing off line breaks. He wasn't necessarily creating them himself, where Teddy last night, he grabs the ball in the middle, he just runs through the forwards and he scores. So, yeah, for me, I'm just going Teddy, but I do understand it's a close one. But it's an interesting conversation. It's crazy how fullbacks have changed since I was younger. Like, back in 2012, I reckon you were lucky to have 5 good fullbacks. Like, it's completely changed. Right now, there's arguably less halfbacks than fullbacks, but yeah, that's a weird conversation for another day. I've also asked you for your top 5 fullbacks ever. Obviously, I'd like to contribute to this, but I've really only watched 2 eras, I guess, of footy, so I don't think I can contribute. So I just wanted to have see your insight. I know it's a pretty bloody vague and open question, best fullbacks of all time, but talk us through your thinking.
Well, yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's really an interesting position because not a lot of them stand out over time, but obviously Billy Slater, I think, is the best. You always suffer from recency in your memory.
Yeah.
Like, you go, well... But no, I think he was pretty dynamic, and he did change... the way I always look at it, did they change the game? And what you just said then, the fullbacks have changed, and Slater changed it. You know, I actually think Brett Hodgson, he's not in my top 5, but when he was under Sheens, he changed the way a fullback played, and he became a ball player. Then Lockyer started becoming a ball player, and then you went from that into this ball player speed, which Slater is, so he really changed the game. At number 2, I got Graham Langlands, who was one of the original Immortals. You know, he played in the 60s, 70s, part of the great St. George era. I saw him, I actually saw him live, and he was a dynamic player. But, he had a big sidestep. They played different games, but very strong defender. Then the 3rd was Gary Jack, who's a Tiger in the 80s, and they always, again, say that Jack changed the game, that he was a bit like Gutherson, he would get the ball, and his strength was he would just run, like he would pick up the ball and just charge into the forward pack. And this is back in the days when fullbacks didn't do that.
Yeah.
He would just rip into them, and he was safe. I mean, I always think there's a really sad thing for Gary Jack, is he's the guy that dropped the ball in the 89 grand final. Up until then, he was safe as safe, and so he was good. I got another guy that probably only older people like me would remember as Graham Eadie in the 70s, same time as Langlands. Played for Manly. He took over from Langlands. He was, again, a dynamic ball player, big solid guy, looked like a wombat, that was his name. But he was big, very much like Gary Jacken off that era. They were big, solid fullbacks.
I've never heard of him, actually.
And then I've got Tedesco. I think Tedesco, I thought about this long. I thought, do you put Lockyer in there? But I see Lockyer more as a 5'8".
Yeah.
And then I suppose you'd have to pull out all your memories, but I think Tedesco. But there's some great fullbacks, but they sort of, like longevity is a hard thing in rugby league, so they come and go. I mean, there's guys like Russell Fairfax that still play for the Roosters in the 70s. He was dynamic. There was Ted Goodwin from St. George. I mean, there's just this huge list to play. Greg Brentnell for Canterbury, but they're the ones I remember. And I mean, Eadie and Langlands dominated at international level before State of Origin, and then Jack was New South Wales fullback for years. And then Tedesco and Slater, so I think that would be my list.
Fair enough, very interesting. I actually haven't heard of your 4th guy, Eadie.
Graham Eadie.
Yeah, I've never heard of him. Interesting.
Well, Manly won 4 premierships with him there.
Wow, so fair player. Alright, moving on. Enough talk about fullbacks. Moving on to our rolling top 8 predictions. Obviously, we discuss this week to week. I've got Dad's top 8 pre-season prediction. He reckons he's only rocking 1 change. Do you want to talk us through that?
Well, at the beginning, I had South first. I see no reason to change that. I think South is dynamic. I got Melbourne 2. Not sure about whether Melbourne's 2. I'm still not sure about Melbourne. I think they're really good. But interestingly, in their 2 big games, they lost.
It's true.
And I think that's where they missed Cam Smith. Cam Smith, I mean, Munster's a really good player, but he's not. I don't know if he's a good game manager. He's a bit crazy.
Yeah.
Whereas Smith would slow games down and get it done. So, but I still have Melbourne 2. Penrith have really surprised me. They're just as good as last year. I thought they might be a little bit off the pace. Canberra 4th. Still got them there. Then I got Parramatta, who I think are good, but not great. They're better than the teams they play, but they're not of that same class. But having said that, Parramatta beat Melbourne.
Yeah, exactly.
You got Roosters. I still got the Gold Coast. I had the Tigers in there, but after watching them and I think I'd put Cronulla in. I think Cronulla actually look pretty good. That would be my 8. Newcastle, I think they were lucky to get there last year. It was just one of those weird draws that they got in there. But they've already lost 2 games, and they're the most vulnerable of the top 8. Gold Coast, I think they're a bit slow, but I think they're going to get better as the year goes on, and their forward pack is dynamic, and I actually think Gold Coast will start rolling. I still think Gold Coast could be a team that really shakes the premiership if they get their act together.
Yeah, 100% agree. Right now they're playing basically, I think Fogarty got injured on Saturday and Ash Taylor's not playing and still putting up good performances with backup halves. So yeah, I completely agree with that. Tino and Fafita have been ridiculous. Looking at my 8, not too many changes this week because most of the favourites did win, so not many opinions changed, but I've still got Storm top, Rabbitohs 2nd, Panthers 3rd, Parramatta 4th, Raiders in 5th. I've got the Roosters up from 7th to 6th. I just think they showed me that they can still be a really good team without Keary or Lockie Lamb. So that's shuffled the Titans down to 7th. No particular reason, just because I lifted the Roosters. And then 8th, I think anyone could take this 8th spot. I think you got the Sharks, Tigers, Dragons. Even the Knights still could get it. It's going to be really interesting to see who does get it. I think ultimately that it's not going to have too much impact on finals because they're likely going to have to play Parramatta or Canberra. So I don't think you're winning that game. But at the moment I've got the Sharks in there. I did have the Tigers. Kind of forgot about Cronulla, can't lie. I just think right now the Tigers look like one of the more solid teams around that spot. Teams like the Knights look too inconsistent and unpredictable, where I'm hoping the Tigers just beat the teams they have to beat this year, but you never know with the Tigers.
The interesting thing about that group of players, teams, Gold Coast Tigers.
The Warriors. I forgot about the Warriors.
They're all teams on the way up.
Yeah, exactly.
So they are teams that probably won't shake it this year. It'll be next year they shake it. And then you look at the Roosters. I still reckon the Roosters, they got big problems. You got Morris. The Morris boys are eventually going to retire, and it's like, who's going to replace them? Friend is meant to be retiring this week, so they're starting to lose players out of that squad. Boyd Cordner, you got to think he's not coming back.
Yeah.
So they got some problems, and then they got a bunch of young players that, that's a problem. Young players, they take a few years to get consistent.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're going to be exposed, I think. So yeah, I think it's, back to the original conversation about where we are. I think actually there are a bunch of teams who are on the way up. It's just they're not ready yet. They're probably a year, 2 years away.
Yeah, I actually think it's a very exciting time right now. Like that, there's so many teams that can make the 8. It's really only 3 or 4 teams that we can rule out, and then pretty much everyone else could be there. I have to say, I keep underestimating the Warriors. They surprised me week after week. They were a little bit disappointing last night, but the Roosters were too good. I think it would be pretty interesting if Canberra finished 5th and the Warriors came 8th, because Warriors have beaten Canberra in the last 2 times they've played at Canberra. So that would be an interesting little matchup there. But yeah, we've both got the Sharks in at 8th right now. They did wallop the Cowboys, but not sure if that's too hard at the moment. But we'll see next Sunday at Leichhardt. I don't want to count my eggs before they hatch.
It's all due with injuries. I mean, if you look at it, if Munster got injured for Melbourne, if Latrell Mitchell got injured for South, Cleary gets injured for Penrith, they all fall apart.
Yeah, 100%. Agree.
I think that's the thing. It's who gets the least. I mean, what you said before, Newcastle's their season's in a mess now because of injuries.
Yeah.
So you only need 1 or 2 bad games where you lose 3 or 4 players, and any of those teams, so it's who's going to hang in there the longest.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Injuries are sadly such a big part of the game. Alright, moving on to our week 5 predictions, round 5 predictions. Obviously, round 4 hasn't even finished, so this feels a little bit weird to be doing, but looking at our sure bets of the week, I can't lie, right now, there's a pantheon of sure bets to pick from, because as we were talked about before, that top 4, top 5 are so good. You're looking at the Storm to be, they are paying $1.04, so I think the punter agrees with you. I'm actually, who did I go with? I've forgotten who I've gone with. Oh yeah, I went the Eels. They're playing the Dragons, so it's arguably a ballsy pick from me.
That's your upset.
No, this is my that's my sure bet. They're $1.34. Yeah, I just think the Eels at Bank West against a bottom 8 team, I don't think they lose. Unless there's some sort of wild injuries this afternoon. Hopefully not for their sake. Hopefully yes for our sake. They are paying $1.34. The Dragons are in good form, but Ben Hunt's out. It's at Bankwest. I just don't think the Eels lose, to be honest. But yeah, the other games, like the Rabbitohs, should beat the Broncos. Something would have to go crazy wrong there. All right, moving on to the upset of the week. This is a tough one to pick at the moment, as I mentioned. Like this week, I don't think there was a single upset, unless the Mighty Tigers get up tonight. Who are you looking at? You've got the Sharks in to beat the Roosters.
Well, Sharks are ground. As I said, Sharks are a team that's surprising everyone because they're right. Like they're at an interesting stage. They've got what they've done. I think John Morris has done a good job. They're an ageing roster, but he's got rid of their Fafita and all that are not playing first grade.
Yeah,
and he's turned it over to the young players, and they're very fortunate that Sharks have got a bunch of young kids coming through. They look pretty dynamic, and the problem with, as we saw with the Roosters last week against South, they're not battle hard in the big teams because they're winning so soft. The problem for them is if they come up a team that can go the distance with them, they're a bit vulnerable because they're just not used to it. So I reckon the Sharks, they've got a pretty bad record against the Roosters, but, throw it in there.
I tell you what, the Sharks, everyone talks about the Penrith crop of youngsters. If the Sharks kept Kyle Flanagan and Jaden Brayley, they've had a pretty good generation of youngsters come through. Almost, I think, over half of their team's homegrown. And obviously, Sean Johnson's out. That's not phasing them at the moment. They've got some forwards to come back. I know Talakai. Don't think Nick Cora played on Saturday, and I think Royce Hunt. So that'll just add to their forward depth.
Moylan's playing the best he's played.
Yeah, exactly. And Chad Townsend's looking good. Connor Tracy, he's just playing at any position they need, and he's doing bloody well. So I think you could be onto one there. I wasn't really sure with either of them, as it is an upset, so it's tough. And I'll probably tip them and get them wrong like I did this week. But I'm going on the Raiders to beat Penrith. It's a tough one. It's tough to tip against Penrith at any week. But the Raiders did win pretty comfortably against the Titans, which I think was an impressive win for them after a disappointing loss to the Warriors. Penrith are still without Coruscant and Edwards, so if they're ever going to be weak, guess you could argue it's during this period. I just think the Raiders have a really good forward pack right now. The Penrith forward pack's playing great, but if you looked at them on paper, you'd pick the Raiders forward pack. So if they can beat them in the middle, maybe Cleary and Luai don't get to play the game on their terms as much as they like. Another upset I'm interested in. Now this is rogue because we've been talking about how bad the Knights season is looking now. But I'm actually going the Knights over the Titans. Once again, I don't know if I fully believe in either of these upsets, but if I had to pick one, these would be the two I pick. The Titans are potentially looking at playing without Ash Taylor or Jamal Fogarty, so neither of their starting halves. The Knights probably get Ponga back, and I just think, even though they've got those injuries, they've still got a good forward pack. They've got the Saifidi boys. Brayley's playing really well right now. No Pierce hurts for sure. But Connor Watson, back him in, mate.
But he's not a halfback.
Yeah, I know. They are in a spot of bother.
Loss of Pierce is a big one for those guys.
Yeah, they're in a spot of bother, but look, I can't lie. Picking an upset in NRL right now is pretty
you think about 2 years ago, Pierce got injured and they went from, I think they were in the top 4 and didn't make the 8.
Yeah, it's true. So, yeah, but it's tough to pick an upset right now because those top teams are so good.
Yeah, but I think that's the thing, though. You've got to focus on when you look at the top 6 teams, any of those teams could win the premiership.
Yeah.
So it's a bit weird. You go, the battle for the top 8's difficult, but the battle for the premiership is wide open.
Yeah, and it's like, if you look at it 1 to 16, yeah, we know there's a good bracket, a mid bracket, and a bad bracket, but that happens most years. And like you said, it's a wide open race, and that spot for 7th and 8th, that race for 7th and 8th, there's about 7 teams who could go in there. So I don't really know where this chat's come from. So I know some people look for clickbait in the media, so they're probably just,
Then you could argue, why did the NRL have this draw for Easter?
Yeah, it's not great scheduling, and I do think scheduling should be way more flexible. Yeah. I know there's stadiums planning, tickets planning.
No, but
teams have got to plan.
If you're doing this draw in the off season, Easter's a big weekend where people watch football. Why would you have the draw that you had? I mean, you look at all those games. The only one would be Manly. You might have thought Manly were better this year, but the other ones like Canterbury and
isn't that a special game though? Isn't that a Good Friday?
Yeah, but I think you just sometimes got to. Well, you got to go. No, like why wouldn't you play instead of South and Roosters last week? Why didn't you play South and Roosters this week?
Yeah,
and then Storm and one big game at Melbourne, so that each one of your stadiums, each one of your cities has got big crowds.
Yeah, I do think the Melbourne-Brisbane game was bit TV rating hungry, that one. I think they were just looking for a massive rating on a Friday night, because that was never ever going to be good in anyone's eyes in pre-season. But that's all we've got for the podcast today. Pleasure having you on. We'll probably try and look to get you on, once a month or whatever. You are a very busy man. You've just been out wrestling pigs in the backyard, chopping trees down like a true man. But yeah, it's been very fun chatting about... I think we've done some good analysis today too. So I'm waiting for the phone call from Channel 9 or Fox Sports. I think we're owed one. We do have a League Unlimited journalist in our house, but sadly it's neither of us.
He doesn't want to be involved.
Yeah, I think that could be a big thing for the podcast, getting a League Unlimited journalist on. But that's okay, Locke. Don't worry about me. But yeah, we've talked a lot. We've talked about a lot of things. We've discussed whether Pappy's the best player in the world.
No, and it's a game. Rugby League loves a crisis. So,
there's
now
always a crisis.
Inequalities is the latest crisis, but is it a crisis?
Absolutely not. So, yeah, same time, same place next week. Thanks for joining me, Dad. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Cheers. Go Tigers.
See ya.